Bienvenue, welcome everyone to the MB Media Co-op's 15th annual keynote address. So first I want to acknowledge that I and some of us here tonight are joining from the unceded, unsurrendered, stolen territories of the Wolastoqey, which is part of the larger Wabanagi Confederacy. So this is the MB Media Co-op's 15th anniversary. So 15 years ago, we went live with our news website, mbmediacoop.org, and distributed our very first edition of the brief. It took us all volunteers several years, but we finally reached our dream of hiring staff. So David Gordon-Koch, our reporter, has covered important stories for us on the police shootings of Indigenous peoples, struggles of workers and organized labor, the working poor and tenants in our province. And when David is not reporting, he's been running media workshops with the Common Front for Social Justice and with Mount Allison University students training the next crop of citizen journalists. In June, we hired the very super dynamic Jigmat Egmo as our part-time manager. So this year, Palestine is our news story of the year, and why we have invited the speaker we have with us tonight. Covering Palestine is not without risk, as tonight's speaker will tell you. If you're not already a member, please join your local media co-op. You can do this by becoming a member, a monthly supporter at mbmediacoop.org. And you can help us keep independent media for social justice alive and thriving. So before introducing tonight's speaker, I have the great pleasure of announcing this year's Brian Beaton Annual Prize for Journalism and Justice. So many of you knew Brian Beaton. He was a thoughtful contributor to the MB Media Co-op and probably the MB Media Co-op's greatest champion. So this $500 prize in Brian's name is awarded to celebrate a journalist who has provided thoughtful coverage of struggles that challenge power and promote social justice. And this year's Brian Beaton Prize winner is Inji Hussein. So congrats to Inji. I think she's here tonight, as well as members of Fredericton Palestine Solidarity, a group that she also belongs to. So I think I'm seeing congrats in the chat. So Inji has submitted numerous stories to us on Palestine this year, often with her beautiful artwork. In the past year alone, Inji has published more than 20 stories with us, many of them about the encampment at Western University, where she is a PhD student. Her stories share perspectives and information of interest to readers here in New Brunswick, as well as beyond. And she is from Fredericton. She has also written about Palestine solidarity in New Brunswick. Her pieces confront settler colonial violence perpetrated by the State of Israel. She has written about the numerous Palestine solidarity groups in the province when other media have completely ignored that movement, except in moments to throw unjust, undue shade at it. So Inji has given voice to the Palestinians in our communities too, who have not had a voice in the other media. Her pieces always show remarkable thought and research and an effort to share important history and context that's not shared anywhere else. So I do know that Brian would be so pleased to give this award to Inji. So congrats. It's also my great pleasure to introduce Zahraa Al-Akhrass, a Palestinian online video journalist who had been working for Global News but was dismissed from her position on October 17th, 2023. Leading up to her termination, Zahraa had been actively posting on social media, like many of us, expressing her critical views on Israel's violence against Palestinians in Gaza and sharing her personal connections to Palestine. So she's going to tell us more about that. So without further ado, Zahraa, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and thanks for everybody for giving me the opportunity to speak. It certainly is an honor to share my story and to say a few words and some thoughts with you all. As Tracy said, I was with Global News for just over 3 years when I was terminated from my position as a video journalist because of my social media activism in support of Palestinians and in criticism of Israel. But before that, I would like to tell you all about the person that who am I behind screens and behind bylines and behind titles as a video journalist and so on. I prepared some slides and I would like to share with you. So this video here is from my hometown in current day Israel. It's called Shagaf. It is a very, very small village to the west of Hebron, West Bank. It was ethnically cleansed, completely ethnically cleansed by Zionist gangs in October of 1948. Around 800 people were living in that village, mostly farmers, including my own great-grandfather, this man here in the photo. Eventually, my great-grandfather escaped with his wife and their children. Their children included my grandfather, Yusuf. They ended up in Jordan right now, where I was born. But the stories I've heard from my dad and my grandfather about the whole injustice that they faced to be forced to leave their homeland. They were just farmers, unarmed, unable to defend themselves in the face of Zionist gangs, armed and well supported by world powers since 1948 until this day. I will play a video for you right now, and you can take a look at how does this village look like today. And this was filmed by some Israeli friends of Palestine who oppose colonialism. I'll scroll through the video. This is all that's left. Rubble, old houses, stones, that's it. Those were homes. Somewhere here, my own grandfather was born. My grandfather was born in Palestine. He lived through the Nakba. But today, if you Google Shagaf on Google Maps, this is what will show up for you. A historical landmark in Israel. My hometown, with 800 people living there, is now a historical landmark. Tourists go there to visit it, and they put up reviews on Google Maps. Things like amazing historical sites, delicate place in the middle of nowhere, but interesting and undeveloped. This is my own hometown that I was robbed of. Other reviews are like a really amazing place, as if it is an ancient city with lots of abandoned buildings and full of tunnels and pits. People take photos here. They pose for pictures and share photos with their families. This was probably a house of somebody, a relative of mine, maybe my own family, my own grandfather. I can never get to know that. And so looking at these photos here, looking at what Google Maps writes about my own hometown, makes me wonder, is this true? Is this right? And knowing the facts from the people who lived there, and the facts that transformed through generations, reaching to me, a fourth generation Palestinian, living thousands of miles away from Shagaf right now. I speak to you from Toronto. The time difference is at least 8 hours. To fly there, I have to take a plane for over 12 hours. And yet those stories that I heard from my father, my grandfather, have shaped me so much that I made it my purpose of life to make sure to not let these people die in vain. My great-grandfather eventually made his way to Jordan and lived there and farmed the land in any effort, in a desperate attempt to recreate the definition of home. And this is a problem. All Palestinians, like myself, living in the diaspora, we have a very complicated definition of what it means to have a home. I came all the way to Canada. I migrated to be able to call somewhere home for myself. I know my homeland is here, this place that people visit as tourists. Can I go there? I would never be able to. I must travel somewhere else to create a home for myself. My daughter now, who is almost 2 years old, and I have her here in the picture. This is my daughter, and I take her to the protests with me, and she holds the Palestinian flag. My daughter would be the fifth generation Palestinian in my family. She has no place to call home but Canada. Yet I tell her that the blood in your veins is Palestinian. You belong to that land that was robbed from your mother, her father, her grandfather, and her great-grandfather. And so knowing all of that, it becomes more sensible to me and to the audience to understand how I view this. This is not some faraway conflict and a complicated political dispute. This is personal to me. The people affected by this are my own family, and the people in Gaza right now suffering a genocide, trying to survive almost a whole year of bombardment and killing, are no different than my own great-grandfather, Hussein. Now, knowing that, I would like to tell you about what happened with Global News. So long story short, I was a target of pro-Israeli lobby groups in Canada. One famous is Honest Reporting Canada. There are some others, but that was the biggest one. I have been the target of Honest Reporting since 2021. They have been monitoring my social media and calling on Global News to fire me. They have created campaigns and lists ever since 2021, since they discovered that I was a journalist with Global News and that I identified myself as a Palestinian Canadian. In October of last year, while I was on my maternity leave, the only thing that I was able to do to support Palestinians and to make sure what happened to my own great-grandfather does not happen again, this time in silence. I wanted the whole world to know what is it like to live through the Nakba, the genocide of 1948, and to live through it again today, 76 years later. So I started sharing on my social media. I have a bit of an audience on my Instagram account, some 100,000 followers. So I was sharing, telling them the stories. I have friends and I also have family in Gaza. So I was sharing their first-hand accounts of their daily lives under Israeli bombardment and so on. When I was approached by my direct manager at the time, and he has informed me that they have received some complaints regarding my social media posts. Going back and forth for a few days, trying to identify which posts were in question. I never was told which posts exactly were the issue. Yet the company terminated my employment and fired me while on maternity leave without sharing a single post that was in violation of their policy. They claimed that my social media posts seem unfair and unbalanced. Yet when I asked for any kind of explanation or clarification on which posts exactly that are in violation of the policy, I was told any post with hashtag Free Palestine, any post with hashtag Gaza genocide. Now, the problem is that how is any media that does not recognize that Gaza is going through a genocide right now could be fair and balanced? But yeah, I was terminated and I was still offered a good amount of money for not speaking up about this and not going public about this, which is something I totally refused. Like I told you, this is not a faraway conflict. This is personal. This is my family. It would be meaningless for me to be a journalist if in this very moment I chose to stay silent. It is just useless to become a journalist and not speak up right now. If you would like to learn more about the details of how this happened, what exactly was the correspondence, you can find the whole story that I wrote for the Briar Patch magazine. I'm trying to show it to you here. Yeah, I'm unable to exit. That's okay. Okay. But yeah, the Briar Patch magazine, I wrote for them, and you can find the full story, the full account here, fighting for fair coverage of Palestine. After that, I decided to go public. I never expected this will be picked up widely, but it did. You see other reels I have shared on social media get around 100, 300,000 views. This one, about my experience with global news, got 3.6 million views. It was shared widely in different countries across all continents. I have gotten people reaching out from Vienna, Germany, South Africa, Australia, literally all around the globe. And in that moment, I realized the problem with media's coverage of Palestine is not just about Canada. It is a worldwide issue. And perhaps in today's world, it is a huge aspect and a huge contributing factor in this genocide being still ongoing 11 months in. So I decided to go public and tell the world this story and hopefully start a conversation around how audiences should be critical of media and how journalists in the newsrooms should stand up for the bullying of some pro-Israeli lobby groups and stand up in face of the intimidation they face in these newsrooms and the censorship we all face, not just Palestinian journalists, but pro-Palestinian journalists, journalists of color. We're always told things like, you're being too emotional, you're too close to the story, you will be taken off this story and you will not be able to talk about this. I felt that when people's lives are on the line, it is no more acceptable for us to prioritize our own careers if those careers are not being put into work to protect these lives and these people. We cannot pick and choose. I have always been very outspoken in support of Ukrainian freedom, in support, in criticism of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Yet I have never, ever got a single complaint from my former employer regarding what I have said on social media in criticism of Putin. Yet every time I speak about criticism of Israel, of its apartheid, of its genocide, of its ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, I am always told to remove tweets, to stay silent, to be balanced and fair. And I felt like this cannot go on. This bullying has to stop at some point. The risk was being terminated, being fired, having to start my career all over again. But I felt like if people in Gaza are trying to save their life, it's okay for me to lose my job over this, especially that this is my own family. It is, as I said, not something far away. This is not an ongoing conflict that is just thousands of miles away. This is very personal. This is my own family. And I believed it is worth getting fired for, and it is worth speaking up for. Now, as I said, this was institutional racism and pressure from pro-Israeli groups. But what really matters is the backstory. I want to tell you about what I have observed over the years in the newsroom of Global News. Before Global News, I was with Al Jazeera in Doha, Qatar. After that, after Global News, I worked briefly with Al Jazeera again, remotely from Canada, but I have decided to take a break for the summer, and now I am looking for job opportunities again. But During my years at Global News, I want to tell you about what I have witnessed that could be the roots of the problem of how Canadian media and mainstream media around the world covers Palestine. And I like to call it, it is a deliberate choice to disinform the public on Palestine. And I mean, there are so many reasons, but I just have written down 4 of them. The first one is lack of knowledge. I went to Sheridan College here in Canada and studied journalism and new media. My professors and my instructors are journalists who are still working in the media industry in Canada. I have had instructors from CBC, from CTV, and from different magazines and news websites and newsrooms in Canada. I have noticed from journalism college and going through the newsrooms in Canada, there is a huge lack of knowledge when it comes to Palestine. I have had conversations with colleagues at college who were not able to tell where is Palestine on a map. I have had to pull up Google Maps and show them where Palestine is. When I was a newcomer to Canada and people would ask me, where are you from? I say, I'm from Palestine, from Hebron, West Bank, because Shagaf is part of the Hebron Governorate. People would be like, where is Hebron? And those were colleagues at jury school, at journalism school. Today, those very colleagues, they work at CBC, at the public broadcaster. So you can imagine how lack of knowledge there is among colleagues when it comes to Palestine. I have had colleagues mixing Palestine and Pakistan together when the US and NATO allies pulled out of Afghanistan, I think it was 2022, we've had conversations with colleagues in the newsroom about what the future for the region would look like. And the region was Afghanistan and surrounding countries, which included Pakistan. People were mixing Palestine with Pakistan. I had to pull up the map again and show my colleagues where is Pakistan and where is Palestine, and that there are some 3,000 kilometers away from each other. It is that much deep that we do not know, as journalists, we do not know the bare minimum about this ongoing so-called conflict. Number 2 is superficial coverage. And I believe the reason for that is to avoid answering the hard questions. If you want to really dig into the topic of Israel and Palestine, you will have to talk about colonization. You will have to talk about apartheid. You will have to talk about ethnic cleansing. You will have to talk about racism. And these are huge topics that not every journalist has the courage and the tools to talk about. So people often tend to cover the Palestinian issue from a humanitarian perspective, and they make it seem like just a humanitarian crisis without actually pointing the finger on the perpetrator, on the root cause of this crisis. I went once to a CBC with my colleagues at Sheridan College. We had site visits. That was in 2018, I believe. At that time, their foreign desk correspondent was Derek Stoffel. I believe he is still the foreign desk correspondent. He was just coming back from Jerusalem, where he was deployed for a few months. And I asked him about his perspective and what does he think the solution going forward for this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he simply said that he believed that if Israelis and Palestinians talk to each other a little bit more, they will sort it out. Now, the problem of colonialism, occupation, apartheid, racism, ethnic cleansing, genocide is not a communication problem. So you see, there's a lot of superficial understanding of what goes on the ground. And Derek Stoffel was the one responsible to tell the story of Palestine to Canadians through the CBC, the public broadcaster. His understanding of the situation is that both parties needed to talk a little bit more to each other. How could Gazans talk to Israeli officials bombarding them? How is that possible? How could me, a fourth-generation Palestinian, deprived from my own homeland, be able to talk to the ones who stole my land, killed my family, and ethnically cleansed my village, and now use it as a historical tourist site? How is that possible? Without answering the real important questions here and facing the problem of the injustices that have happened since 1948 and up until this day, there will be no reconciliation. And we can see this very well here in Canada. We understand this in Canada very much because of the past of the Indigenous people of this land. It is not that different in Palestine. There are Indigenous peoples in Palestine that have been ethnically cleansed and still are, that have been the subject of racism and apartheid and ethnic cleansing and still are. Without answering those questions, there will be no reconciliation. And so media has to tackle these very questions. Media's job and journalism's job is to speak truth to power. We have to speak to our editor, to our news room decision makers, to our editors, to our CEOs, just as we speak to public officials and elected officials and ministers. We have to hold our own managers in the newsroom accountable for the decisions they make to disinform the public about what happens in Palestine. Number 3 was, why should we care? And this is a question I heard so much from a very famous journalist. You all know David Common. David Common of CBC. He was my instructor. He was teaching global reporting at Sheridan College. And I hold all respect to him. I don't mean to say this to undermine any of these people's experience and knowledge. I have all learned from all of them so much. But I'm just giving you examples of what really goes on in newsrooms, what happens behind the headlines and behind the newscast that takes place at 6:30 p.m. You need to know these conversations that take place in newsrooms. So why should we care? Was question number 1. David Common was asking us, students, whenever he gives us an assignment, he was encouraging us to make sure our audience sticks around and watches our full 2-minute report. And so he wanted us to think hardly about how should we make sure in the first 15 seconds of the report or the first line of a story to attract the audience, the reader, whoever watches our report. And he was like, there always has to be a Canadian angle for your audience to care. Now, this assumption is that Canadians and Western people in the West in general do not care about the rest of the world unless it has a Canadian or a local angle. Well, it assumes that the public is selfish and is careless and is ignorant, and it feeds into that. It feeds into this idea that people in Canada who are already far away from the Middle East, who are separated by geography, by time zones, and by language, who live in some sort of a bubble and should be incentivized to care about lives of Palestinians, as if the fact of a human life is just not enough. There needs to be an incentive for your audience to care. This is how journalists teach students in journalism school, is that unless there is a local angle, your audience will not care Your story is not going to go public. Your editor is not going to approve this story. You must have a local angle. But this is a big problem because Canada does supply Israel with weapons, pays money to Israel. It helps Israel in its colonialism, and it helps Israel in its bombardment of Palestinians in Gaza. So we certainly should care. Our taxpayer money is being used in this conflict. And so that itself is an enough reason for us to care. There doesn't need to be a reason for a Canadian neighbor who's got some family in Gaza to have the story approved and be told. You can talk about any person in Gaza. You don't need to have a Canadian angle for your story to be approved and published and talked about. So this is number one. Number three, and finally, number four, no resources on the ground. This is a problem I often dealt with in global news. When the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, global news, just as every other Western media outlet, sent journalists on the ground to cover what happens in Ukraine. Global news did not send anybody into Gaza, anybody into Palestine. They do not hire freelance journalists from the ground. They do not even have connections with journalists on the ground. And so the image they always have is a bit distorted. They only send journalists to the Israeli side. They don't have people speaking Arabic or people from the region to tell the story from within Gaza or from within the occupied territories. When people like me try to get into covering the story, I am being censored. I am being told things like too close to the story and too emotional, and there's a conflict of interest. But other colleagues of non-marginalized groups are not told these things. They're not being criticized as too close to the story or being too emotional about this topic. They can cover it freely with no censorship. But when it comes to Palestinians themselves telling their own stories, there always is a problem. When you try to connect people on the ground with decision makers in the newsroom, there's lots of obstacles. There's lots of scrutiny that takes place that does not take place with Israeli sources. We have seen Israeli officials and Israeli witnesses and people on the ground lying live on air. And we have gotten CNN anchors, NBC anchors, and also here in Canada, repeating those lies unchecked and unverified. That same thing does not happen with Palestinians. We have seen the op-ed that was published by The Breach, and it was a first account witness of a journalist in CBC who resigned her position at CBC in protest of how the CBC covered Palestine in recent months. And in that piece, she has written that CBC supervisors and editors were not allowing the word genocide to appear on air. We're fact-checking whether a Palestinian relative really died. They were asking for witnesses to bring a death certificate of a loved ones in order for them to believe that this person has died under a genocide right now. So there's lots of scrutiny that is not on the same level on both sides. And I believe this is the summary of the four main reasons why Canadian media works to disinform the public on Palestine, and sure is one of so many reasons that got to the point that I was fired and lots of other colleagues were censored or fired or intimidated across the Western world, across the English-speaking world. But I believe it is worth it. My final word would be a piece of poem written by Professor Rifat Al-Arir. He's a Palestinian professor of literature who got his master's degree from University College London, and was in the process of getting his PhD when he was killed by an Israeli airstrike last year in Gaza. And he has written in his poem, "If I must die, you must live to tell my story." And this is exactly what I believe all of us should do. If a Palestinian must die, if my grandfather, great grandfather must die, then I must live, and we all must live to tell their stories. And this is an image of myself and my daughter in one of the protests in Toronto. And I sure make every effort to tell her the story and to make sure she carries the story on to the next generation. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Tracy. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Zahraa.